Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Top Voice Tuesday. Very excited and looking forward to this conversation with Vince Burruano, who you see in front of you. I'll give him an opportunity to introduce himself in just a moment. For those of you who are new to this LinkedIn Live series, every week we meet another top voice and have a conversation about a range of business and life issues. And this week's is really going to be an exciting dive into AI and the world of writing. If you've missed any back episodes, these are all hosted on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9. Please do go subscribe to that. I'll put the link in when I do the repost of this episode. And then, of course, I've mentioned this several times. We're going to have a newsletter that's starting this week. So please do sign up for that. I'll send the link as well. Last note for folks that are dialing in, please do use the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. We'd love to take a question as we go. So without further ado, Vince, you and I met several weeks ago. Annalie, good to see you as always. There in the chat. We met several weeks ago and we had a fascinating conversation about writing. You're an author, two-time author. I'm a one-time author. You can see the book that I just released behind me. But Vince, please introduce yourself to everyone. Tell us what you do. We're going to jump in.
Well, Michael, thank you again for the invitation. My name is Vince Burruano. I have been in sales and leadership roles for, over 30 years now. Currently, I'm an independent consultant and have been so for the last 3 years, and working with companies to help them onboard and find and develop sales talent as well as leaders. Prior to that, I spent most of my career working in corporate America for different companies selling products and services, everything from copiers and printers to selling moving services. I'm originally from the New York area on the Hudson River across from West Point. Spent about the first 26 years there. Got married and relocated down to Northern Virginia, spent another 25 or so years there. And now I reside with my wife and nearby my son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter in Somerville, South Carolina. So quite the journey.
Love it. Love it. We share our transition from the corporate world to the independent world over the last couple years. And it's interesting. We're going to have an episode here, I think, later towards summer about this very topic, about these transitions. So we might get into that. But our first question, Vince, is always about the top voice journey. That's how you and I met. We're both top voices. That's why you're here. Tell us about your journey to the top of the Top Voice Mountain. How did you get here? How did you go about it? When did you get the notification? We'd love to hear your journey.
So I'm really somewhat embarrassed because I don't know when I started on the journey. And you and I talked about this before, and I still did some poking around, and I'm still embarrassed because the more research I've done about it, the more I realize that there's people trying to climb this mountain. And I don't really know exactly how I got here. So I thought what I would do is I would share some of the things I have been doing and then what I've been doing, if that's
We'd
acceptable.
love it. We'd love it.
I think, it's really hard when you're dealing with certain types of, whether it's LinkedIn or anything else that have algorithms, because they're always changing the algorithm. So it's hard to know exactly what you're doing makes the algorithm happy or not, quite frankly. I did have an opportunity, it was well over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, where LinkedIn had a thing referenced their articles that were being generated by AI. And they did reach out to me and ask me if I would consider doing postings every week, several a week, where I commented on whatever it is that their AI article had posted. And at first, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do this because I realized I was making AI smarter at my expense, And then
Another conversation that we can have.
another conversation. Then I thought about it and I said, well, you're being very small-minded. Maybe that's why AI is smarter than you. Why don't you look at it as an opportunity to share what you do know, and maybe it'll help other people. So I started to participate in that. And back then they had some type of community badge program or something similar. And they actually did a nice job running it. They had monthly meetings where they had somebody from LinkedIn get with 20 or 30 of us and talk to us about the process and different things. And I got a lot from it. And I'll tell you, the other thing was a lot of exposure, because I was sharing my ideas alongside what the I guess AI had generated. And there were people who could, like it and comment and reach out. And I did grow my following and connections. It was interesting. There were some people, that reach out and ended up having conversations with people in different parts of the world. I can remember I met one person, we jumped on a call. He was in India. So, I don't know when I'll be traveling there. I do travel extensively, but if I do, I know I at least have one friend there, which is
There you
nice.
go. There you go.
So, a lot of times, I think the opportunity to have this type of engagement opens itself to meet people like you, where I know in our first conversation, we had so much in common. I don't know if we ever really got to the main topic. And
Yeah.
by the time we did, we realized that we should be talking about something else. And I thought it was a great, 30, 45 minutes spent, because I've met somebody else that, if I had grown up next to, we'd have been best friends growing up.
I
And I have a
appreciate
few
that.
other people, a couple other people I've met. I have one friend, Kevin, out in California. We met when I published my first book. He had asked me about it. We emailed back and forth. Then we were on a phone call, and then I'm out visiting my in-laws. And every time I'm out on the West Coast, we get together for lunch. And
It's
again, it's
great.
one of these things where you go, if we lived on the same street, we would have been friends, since kindergarten.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I think that comment about the LinkedIn articles, everybody sees those. And I know that I did much of the same. I had someone really just giving me some advice a couple years ago about starting a journey of posting more. And, we talked about this in the first episode, that there's really three ways. There's posting your own content, there's commenting on other people's, and then, these LinkedIn articles really do work. They really do have um, an impact on your following. So I would tell people, when you get those opportunities, comment. And I ended up getting an invite to do some of the LinkedIn news things as well, which was pretty cool. So never miss an opportunity to raise your hand to contribute, which I think is the story that you're really sharing with us. So let's talk about writing. And the topic of our conversation today is, why should we write when AI can do it for you? And this is a conversation that a lot of people are talking about. I heard a story anecdotally about a lawyer that had done some sort of pre-brief writing using AI, didn't check the work, and ended up having kind of a disastrous outcome in court, because he or she just, took at face value what was coming back. Right.
yeah.
So before we get there, you've written a couple books. Tell us about the books you wrote. Why did you write them? How did you write them?
Good question. So I'm going to focus mostly in on my first book, with your permission. It's the one entitled "A Daily Dose of Sales Wisdom,"
Love it.
and I'll talk to you a little bit about my journey. So I I was an undergraduate at the Catholic University in Washington D.C. at the School of Philosophy, and I was always amazed at the number of books that had been written and that we were studying, that were literally 1,000 years old, and the professors who were writing, and just got it in my head at a young age that at some point I'd really like to write a book. And then life happens, and I wasn't an
Right.
author by trade, but I got to be about, I don't know, turning 50, more than halfway through the stretch, and I said, maybe this is something now that I have a little bit more time, I should do. So I went out and I bought a really nice journal, and I got a really nice pen, and I made a commitment, like a New Year's resolution, that I would write for 10 or 15 minutes a day. And I started doing that. And over time, over the number of months, I all of a sudden had almost filled the journal. And all I tried to do was kind of recall stories or lessons learned or different things. And next thing you know, I'm kind of photocopying it and organizing it. And the next thing you know, I have the startings of a book. And I did not go to a publisher to have it published. I didn't want to go through the turmoil mentally of getting rejected 75 times. I took the easy way out, and working with a friend of mine, Thomas Ellis, he put me in contact with somebody who could help me self-publish it, and Marsha Allen Luke, and she's in Canada, and she did a fabulous job helping me with the editing and bringing it together to be published. And I would say from kind of start to finish, it was an over a year process, but it was a journey. And at least I got to say I did it. And I really did it for very selfish reasons. I did it because I wanted to prove to myself I could finally pick a New Year's resolution and see it from beginning all the way to the end, which I've never been able to do with any of those.
Yeah, that's actually in my book about why that happens. But I want to jump in really quickly, Vince, just to raise a couple points. And thank you, Christine. There's a point about this being a big topic. There's so much wisdom in what you just shared. And I want people to really hold on to this. The first one, it parallels your top voice story. You didn't set out to become a top voice. You didn't set out to write a book. You created a goal. And that goal was to spend a certain amount of time writing in a journal. And you didn't even have an intent in that I was going to write about this story or that story. You were just going to write. And, so much of change, behavior change, accomplishing goals is about incremental progress without a real attachment to the outcome. And, this is a question I get all the time now. I wrote one book, you wrote two, so you've got me beat at least by one. Is the first question I get is, how can I write a book? Right? Like, hey, I have an idea for a book. I want to go write one. Tell me what you did. And I think your story is pretty much what most people do. They spend time writing down the things that are important to them, with a piece of content or a topic or a story. And what I love about yours also is people say this, well, how long did it take you? And I'm like, well, for me, I started writing in January of 2024. I finished the first draft in July. They're like, wow, 7 months, that's really fast. And I'm like, okay, well, 20 years and then 7 months, because that's really what it
Yeah.
sort of takes, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I just love, for those of you listening, the magic to writing a book is the consistency of spending time writing. That really is the first step. And I think you'll learn about the sort of journey along the way. I'd love for you to share another story with everyone when we talked about your creative writing experience when you were 13 or so, because I think so many people who also want to write books have a similar moment in their life when they say, I've got something I want to tell, or I've got an itch. And you've just got a great story that I'd love for you to share with everyone.
I'd be happy to do that. So when I started high school, I was a little bit on the younger side. I was 13 years old, and I went to a regional high school because our town that I grew up on was so small. There were 4 towns that came together to make up the high school. And I had this English teacher for 9th grade, Mr. Baisley. And this was actually going to be his final year teaching. He was retiring at the end of the year. And it was that freshman English kind of creative writing. And our first assignment was to write any type of story we wanted. And I had just signed up and started playing JV football. And I was awful, by the way, if anybody's curious. And I thought I would write a story about that. So back then, when you're writing these stories, you're literally printing these stories loosely paper. And I turned it in along with everybody else. And a couple of weeks later, he passes out everybody's assignments back. And, for everybody, there was a grade up in the corner, an A, a B plus, something. On mine, there was no grade. So at the end of class, I go up, and I'm really not that bright to start with. And I have no idea why I have no grade on this thing. And I look at him. He said, well, you see all the notes? And I said, yes. He said, well, I want you to go and focus on rewriting it. Don't worry about the grade. Just go and rewrite it using the notes. So this is not like going back to now where we go into the thing and I got to rewrite the whole thing, and as a 13-year-old, I want to do this like I want somebody to drill a hole in my foot. And so I go through and I'm looking at his notes and I'm rewriting it. And I turn it in, and he passes out back assignments, and I get it back, and there's more notes, and there's still no grade. So I go up again to class. And he goes, "Stop worrying about the grade. Just follow the directions." So this goes on for weeks. I'm rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. Everybody else is getting grades. I'm starting to wonder. I said, again, I know I'm not the smartest kid in the class. I didn't think I'd be the worst kid in the class. Finally, I go up to see him. He asked to see me at the end of class. He said, "I looked at your last draft and it's done." And I said, "Finally, I'm going to get a grade." I said, "Well, what's my grade?" He goes, "Your grade is that in tomorrow's local newspaper, your article, your story is going to be published."
That's great.
And so at the ripe old age of 13, my first writing sample of with 75 drafts was published in the local paper. My mother, I think we had to go to 3 different uh, delis because she kept buying them out of all the local papers because everybody in my family had to get at least 2 copies. But I will tell you this. At the time, as fun as it was to see your name in the newspaper, because that was really a novelty, Mr. Baisley showed me I had a voice. And I talk to people about this a lot. Everybody has to find their voice. And I've tutored and worked with younger people. And it's the one thing I try to help them do, find your voice, whether you're writing a book or a story or just talking to people. And I never really got a chance to thank him for what he did for me, because at 13, I just didn't really appreciate it. I mean, I thanked him for, getting my article, my story published, but it wasn't until I was much older and he had long retired and moved away that I realized what an impact he had. And for him to do that in his final year, I think is a testimony to him as a person and as an educator.
Yeah.
Because he could have just ridden the wave and gone off into the sunset, but he didn't.
I'm gonna share a funny story. We have many parallels in our lives. Mine may be a little different, but I want to highlight a couple points here that I think are really important for folks. What I think is so beautiful in this story, in addition to the mentorship that you got from a teacher, and for those of you that are teachers that have an opportunity to teach others, it is among the most noble professions in the world. And clearly, there's a man who had a lifelong impact on you that resulted in a book, almost 40 years later that you took the time to write. A couple of things I think are really so elegant about this story. He never told you why you were doing it. And I think had he told you, you're going to put an article in a newspaper, you would have tightened up, more than you could have imagined. And the pressure of trying to do something of that magnitude would have scared you away from trying. Number
Yes.
one, it's a really important thing. And I talk a lot about this in terms of setting goals and why focusing on the goal and the outcome really distracts us from the process of going about accomplishing the goal, which is really more important. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the number of repetitions that you took at that story. I will tell you, and you probably have this experience, I mean, the listeners, by the time I was done writing my book, I hated it. I just wanted it to go away. I was still getting feedback from folks. I had a few trusted folks reading it. They had a lot of ideas, and I was like, I just want this thing to go away. But that's the kind of consistency and feedback and repetition that's required to do something in this magnitude. And that's true for anything in life. The last thing I think that's really important, and I want to transition in this conversation because we're going to talk about AI in a second, this idea of finding your voice. The number of people that I think talk themselves out of writing something because they don't think anyone would be interested in what they have to say is pretty substantial. I've heard this many times. Oh, I want to write a book. I don't know that anyone would read it. I don't know that I have some, why would anyone want to hear my story? And I think we are our own worst enemy in talking ourselves out of doing something great. And I just think that's so beautiful. There's a comment in here about finding your voice as a writer and how you shared your story, Vince, and it really is quite charming. Just as a funny point, your teacher told you that he wanted you to find your voice. He was retiring. I had an English teacher when I was a senior who was retiring, and he shared a different story with me, which he said, Michael, someday I hope you have a son just like you, so that you know what you do to me every day in class. So,
Yeah.
it's he was a good man, but I was a little bit of a troublemaker.
Yeah,
So
I actually heard that from my mother numerous times, so I know
yeah,
exactly where it's coming from.
yeah. So we've talked a lot about finding your voice and this process conversation about the process of writing. So let's just ask the question, and I'm going to reverse order the questions a little bit. Why should we keep writing today when we can just put a prompt into Chat GPT and get an answer back? Why that's somebody asked me, "Have you used AI to write your book?" And I said it in the post. I wrote every word of my book. Nobody else wrote anything. So
Right.
so why should we do that? Because it's so easy to push the easy button.
Well, it is. And so I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I was reading some other things, and I've come to the conclusion that, and maybe it's my study of philosophy when I was younger, there's all this thought around us being rational creatures. We're intellects. And at the time, I really struggled with that because I don't think we give enough credit to the emotional side,
Mm.
the feelings, and all this other stuff that a lot of times we don't want to talk about. And I think what's coming to full view for me anyway is that as much as AI can take bits and pieces of information and put it together, right, to present it, it can't feel. It doesn't feel anything. Feeling is very human, and I think writing and sharing our feelings, sharing our thoughts, sharing our fears, sharing our aspirations, sharing the good and the bad is in part our humanity. It's what makes us people. And whether we're very different backgrounds, different parts of the world, when we come to the part where we can, translate so we understand, we all share these same things in common, you know, um, and it's powerful. It's what connects us. Otherwise, we're just here on the rock. And that's, I don't know. I just don't think that's the whole picture, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think writing is that piece of humanity that is very important. I would put it up there in very much the same way with things like song and dance. It is what makes us what we are.
There is such a foundational element of our community. We are a social species. It's a thing I talk about in my book, right? So, social interaction is among the most biologically rewarding interactions that we can have, and we tell and experience that through story. And so those stories, for anyone who's thinking about, should I write a book? Yeah, you should. Not just because you have something to say, which is a big part of it, but there's a part of the process of writing that I think is so important. I remember, we're telling high school stories now. I remember my geometry teacher. Um, we had a conversation once. We were doing proofs, word problems, right? And we had to prove, like sine is 1 over cosine or something like that. I know that that's the formula. And I remember asking him, why do I need to go through the process of proving something that I already have the answer to? And he, like your story, made a point to me that to this day is so profound. He says, because it's not about knowing the answer, it's about understanding the answer, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding why that answer is what it is, because that's the root of insight. and
Yes.
and and insight for us is such an important element of the human experience. And so I think there's writing my own book, I remember many early mornings, late nights, and in between that I was discovering new information as I was writing. I was refining my point of view. I was contradicting myself. I was getting things wrong. I was researching new information. And, I don't know how many books I've sold. It's been a couple months, but the experience I got of learning about myself and my topic in the course of writing is far more valuable than anything I wrote down in those, 180 pages. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a big piece of this. Now, this is not to say that this is not an AI doom and gloom sort of story. So for us, Vince, do you use AI today in any kind of content generation and writing? And how do you, as someone who's written a book by hand, how do you use it now? What does that look like for you?
So it's interesting because I have to stay current, right? I consult with companies and businesses and sales professionals, and so I need to keep up on it. So I do use AI. I don't use it so much to write the books that I've written per se, or many of the articles that I've written, but I sometimes use it as a prompt to thinking. So if I've come up and I have a list of say 5 things that I want to talk about, say leadership, I might plug in, and ask AI. And of course, we know that how you ask, you get different responses. But trying to get better at that. What does AI think are the 5 most important things about leadership today? And I'll just run that to see how what I have already written down aligns. Or I might ask it something about sales, and again give it. But I do have a funny story about AI, if it would be okay to share. I don't want
We
to.
love funny stories.
So, about 5 or 6 months ago, I was talking to I have 3 brothers, and we were chatting about AI and some different things about it. And I said, I use it here and there. I just don't use it as much as other people. And I don't upload any information. I don't take and upload, articles and ask it to edit it or anything like that. So I decided to ask AI if it knew who I was. And I did this on 2 different platforms, ChatGPT, Copilot. Not an expert, but I said, who do you know who I am? I typed in my name, and it said yes. And it had I was quite pleased by the fact that it, had a couple of paragraphs of information. And then just for giggles, I decided to ask each of them. I said, if you had the choice, knowing that I'm a sales and leadership, expert, would you rather hire me to help you learn about these topics, or would you rather hire AI? And this is when I realized how smart the technology was. They both said they would hire me. And so I took the screenshots and sent it to my brothers and said, see, this thing is smarter than I thought. It knows well enough that it should hire me rather than hire its cousin, who's not human.
That's
And so
funny.
anyway, I've been trying to
Yeah.
figure out exactly how I can work that into my marketing.
There's
Yeah,
a great, it used to be that you used to Google yourself, and now I guess everyone should go AI themselves and really ask it. I think this question is really so great, is you don't use it for writing. You use it to prompt thinking. And
yes,
I think that is such a great, and Christine's got a comment in the chat about writing is the best way to dive into a topic, and it clarifies your thoughts, right? This idea that prompting thinking, right? This big, mass of gray material between our ears, right? I say this all the time. No 2 brains on planet Earth are the same. No
right,
2 brains will ever be the same.
right.
And each of us has something unique as a result to offer to the world. And writing and learning to write and continuing to write is part of, I think, the discovery process that we all owe ourselves in our lives at some point, to figure out. We both, you and I both start writing our books at 50. I was 50 when I wrote my first book, started writing it down. So, I think this idea that the easy button of AI to find answers, it's less it's less about that. It's about the journey of discovery. And I think that's really what we're learning in this conversation. Writing is an essential element of the journey of discovery that I think all of us should spend time on. So it's worth it. It's worth it to do the geometry problem the long way.
It is. Well, I have a great quote that I have hanging on an index card here, since I do some coaching of younger people. It's by Albert Einstein. And it says, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And I really struggle to think of other ways outside of writing, as an example, as a great way to train the mind to think, like you said, to kind of explore your thinking and recognize the contradictions, and recognize sometimes that maybe you don't have the perfect answer. And so you start a journey to explore that more. I think those are all things that are valuable, not only in an education environment or book writing, but just in general, life in general.
Absolutely. There's so many parallels, and we're about to wrap. If anyone has a question they want to ask Vince, I have another one. We always have our bonus question, but I would also say one other element of writing a book, and you've written two, so this is probably something you can relate to. Um, when you write a book, it is there's a lot of toiling. It takes some time. You got to sit and do it and write and rewrite, and you kind of moan and groan through a lot of the process. And the minute it's done, it's sort of like running a marathon. The minute it's done, you go, when's the next one, right? And so there is this interesting process of who you are on the other end of that experience, which I think is also someone who's wants to do it again. And you've written too, so I know you have that experience. Vince, this has been great. I really do just appreciate your storytelling. For those folks that want to check out his books, we'll give you a chance to kind of tell the story there. But there's always a bonus question, as you know. So the last guest leaves a question for the next guest. I love this tradition that I stole from the Diary of a CEO. Question for you, Vince, is if you had $1 to invest in your business in the highest impact area, how would you find that highest impact area? And how would you know that that dollar is being spent successfully?
That's easy, but I'm going to cheat because I'm going to rely on my good friend, Benjamin Franklin. He always said that a penny invested in yourself is never wasted. So I would use it to invest in myself.
I love that. What a great quote to end on. And I think it's a really, really sage point of this conversation, right? Writing is not just about the story you tell, it's about the investment in yourself and the journey of discovery. Vince, you get the last word. Where can people follow you and connect with you? Obviously, this is LinkedIn, but anything you'd like to offer to folks listening in and things
Yes.
that they can reach out for?
Yes, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I thought it would be fun that the first two people from the broadcast who mentioned having listened to the podcast today, who reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me an invite with a note that says, "Hey, heard you on Michael Lopez's show." I will send an autographed copy of my book to them. So some might argue that me signing it will have it go down in value, but one way or the other, I will get a copy of the book. It'll be my pleasure to send it out to the first two people who send me an invite, and I'll respond back, ask for your mailing address, and get those sent out to you right away.
And
Thank you.
I can testify that he'll do it. I have one. I sent one to Vince, and it's a lot of fun. So thank you all, as always, for tuning in, especially for a Wednesday, Top Voice Tuesday, but on a Wednesday. Thank you for indulging the schedule change. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.